So we have a really great and hardworking staff in this area. We really do. I mean, the Jennifers, their teams, it's a great staff and they really are dedicated, and thank you. And at the same time, it's not inconsistent to say that the community frustration, in my view, is warranted. And here is the dilemma in the city. I'm going to let everyone peek behind the curtain for a moment, because this is what goes on every day in our city. This is not an excuse, but this is the dilemma. The city is a municipal corporation that has had traditional roles. And its traditional roles have been to invest in traditional public safety and basic services. And of course, you can't do other things if you don't do that well. And we do that well. And that is important. But what's really at issue in our city now is that the public is rightfully demanding that our city and our city government change and expand what it considers to be its core priorities. Been saying this now for months, if not years. It's been kind of the theme of my own mayorship here. Whether it's affordable housing and homelessness, whether it's deeper investments in youth, whether it is climate, the public is saying cities should do more. And the pushback has been from those who have been around the city for a long time is, well, wait a minute. The city cannot be the only one that is leaning in and investing heavily in these, quote, new areas, even though they are absolutely appropriate and necessary for a city to take on. So what is the answer here when a budget is presented yesterday that shows, based on revenue projections, there is not a lot of new money? What do we do? Part of the answer, I think, is to be very conscious of what, I don't know which member referred to this, but the siloing of the way we operate city government. For example, Public Works is a great department, and Ryan Moore and Hector Barone are terrific leaders, and they're really into this. But I would just ask rhetorically, why isn't the climate function combined with economic development in a more substantial way? Because the city manager is working really closely with me after my State of the City address, State of the Downtown address, around this notion of an EIFD. And I said in my speech that, an EIFD could be not just for basic infrastructure, but it could be the local match for the green, for a number of the initiatives that Jennifer Venema laid out here today and that we've been talking about for months. And yet, if climate is sort of separate from economic development, where is that synergy to drive the EIFD study in a way that begins to imagine and think about how those proceeds could in part be used to help fund a more robust climate initiative? Because we're not backing up our commitment, and it's a real stated commitment with real resources. And yes, a couple person unit is not enough here, as good as Jennifer and her team are. And so the one thing that I would like to come out of this is that climate be seen as more of an economic development initiative. The Mobility Center is a perfect example, and Eric Guerra is correct. Whether an EIFD is appropriate for Ramona or not, I suspect that it may be, just as it wasn't one moment for Aggie Square, and then all of a sudden it became the main source of our local contribution. That I'd like us to be driving these things much more forcefully. And I know that our consultant report, done in relatively short order, will help us answer these questions. But I would like to see a merging of these agendas. And then on this year's budget, I've seen it, and we went over it today, and I know that we are spending a lot of money on homelessness. And, the city manager says to me all the time, about not only me, but the city council. How many new priorities can the city and the city council have, right? We're juggling a lot. My answer is that, well, great cities and growing cities have to find a way to be as creative as possible to initiate as much as we can. And so I'd like us, for example, to look at our current CIP, our current public works budget. Just look at it. We haven't even asked the question yet, and ask ourselves whether there's anything we're currently doing that could be deferred or put behind some of these urgent climate action. The 7 big projects are not the end of the work, the be all and the end all. But if we were to accomplish them, and by the way, $75 million over the course of, say, 5 to 7 years, one-time money, by the way, it's not ongoing money. Between EIFD, some repurposing, can't we find a way to at least get started more aggressively on trying to fulfill that those sets of ideas that have been put forward? On the climate action plan, I understand on the one hand the reason for delay, but I also fear the signal that it sends. Is it possible that we can get updated every month and we can be really pushing towards as early a completion of that project, even by summer, as possible, even if it predates the general plan review? Because I think what we're hearing from the community is not that we're not performing well, but that we're not making this enough of a priority. And yes, we have to be creative around the resource question, but I would like us to do everything we can to lean in more to show the community that the Climate Commission, that the untold hours of work that Jennifer Venema and her team have done, that we're actually doing everything we can to try to bring some life to this. And so when this merged more with economic development, the EIFD thing is crucial because that could be a source of one-time funding for a number of our initiatives and the local match. Just having a discussion again about what could be repurposed, just as the city manager and the finance team did so creatively and appropriately to fund the $33 million gap on our homeless initiatives. That was a really great piece of work. So yes, we can. Yes, we can. And we want to elevate this discussion and see how far we can go, and show some more progress. City manager?
Mayor, this item is not up for action tonight, but what we can do, well, let me first say that if climate is a priority or the priority, we will certainly make it so. What I would suggest is that we will bring back an action item that can take a look at scrubbing all of our CIPs, including current projects, to prioritize these big 7. But please understand that means the various projects that come to the council every week that are priorities in the various districts will be put on the back burner. So I just want to be clear, because it's sounding as though our team is not prioritizing this, but really it's the council.
It's always taken. It's not a criticism. It is not a criticism.
I hear you.
All I'm saying is that it is appropriate to pose the choices, just as you described. And if the city council, we're the ones responsible, and if the city council wants to transparently and consciously say, we want to fund these bikeway projects, these green projects ahead of something else, just set up the conversation for us so that we can have that, and frankly, so that the community can engage in that conversation as well, because we hear things in siloed form, correct? And that's all that the passion from the community and Councilmember Harris and all of us, right, about, oh God, climate is the existential imperative. Are we doing enough? Is to just pose those questions so that together we can make those choices.
I do want to be helpful and provide those options. And that's what I'm suggesting is that we do bring something back to have the conversation about what it could take to look at these, 75 or $80 million in match funding to prioritize this. All I'm suggesting is that there are many other priorities that come before this council too. And that we want to make sure that you have all the options.
No, we just want options. But I want to say one other thing that might be a sore spot here, because it's important that we get it out. And this is the issue of bonding, which I know is going to come on, which I know is going to come before the city council in various forms over the next couple of months. Councilmember Chenier has been very out there on the issue of housing and a housing bond. And so I understand completely the downside of bonding. You're indebting yourself as a city for 30 years for one-time investments. Completely get it. But then you then you look at the other side and say, well, that's how we traditionally have invested in infrastructure over time. It is the only way to fund big projects. It's why we have a brand new convention center. It's why we have a new community center theater. It's why we have community centers and so many community facilities. And so is a mobility center and that economic driver important enough to think about financing it, either through an EIFD or a bond? Are these projects important enough in terms of our contribution to climate to consider financing in a creative way? Is affordable housing, as we're going to talk about in a number of weeks, important enough that it's worth the $5 million or so of debt service, depending on how you do it a year? Because while there are downsides to this, there are also losses in not investing in our economic future, in equity, in climate. And I think that's what this city is grappling with. And by the way, I think it's a healthy debate, because we are arguing as friends, all with love for our city, about what should be the priorities of our city. That's all it is. It's not a criticism of performance. It's really that argument, and it's a good one. And reasonable people can be on either side of that argument. But God darn it, the people are saying we want more for our city. How do we pay for it? Jeff Harris said we should spend more money on climate here tonight. I mean, there you go.
I agree. I think the answer to many of those questions is yes. It's worthy of a discussion.